Hey everybody, it's Thursday afternoon and I actually had some plans for the fish room today and was going to shoot some video about it, but they fell through. So I decided what we're going to do instead is take an impromptu trip around the world. It's been a little while since we've done this and I feel like I've got a bit to cover this week. So we will go over everything that's been going on here in the fish room, or at least everything I can think of while we're looking at each tank. So we're going to start here at my Waterfall Tank. The most recent development in this tank has been that it developed a small leak and was dripping into the back. When this tank leaks, I don't know where the leak actually comes from because of the porous nature of the foam I've made it out of. The leak itself could be anywhere. The water then weeps through the foam, it comes out in the back, and then it winds up dripping off of the woodwork in some place. However, when I get a leak in this tank, it usually doesn't last very long before it sort of self-seals. And it does that, I believe, by simply having gunk and crud and stuff get in it. In the same way you can see all that green, slimy cyanobacteria growing on stuff, and algae and duckweed. Wherever the water is weeping in, the same kind of stuff is going to happen. Whatever little pinhole there is, silt and other sediment stuff will get caught in it or grow in it, and before you know it, I don't have a leak anymore. And that's exactly what happened. Within a few days, that drip was almost gone, and I checked again this morning, and the paper towel I had back there is completely dry, so nothing is leaking at all anymore at this point. The other thing we've got going on in this tank at the moment is a chemi-clean treatment. Got the air stone in there, and you can really see the difference. My regular viewers anyway will be able to tell that the green carpet or the green film that covers just about everything in this tank, including my Java Windelov there, it's all pretty much gone. I've done back-to-back treatments on this. I did really heavy doses of it now that I understand what's going on with the chemi-clean a little more. It's basically a form of erythromycin. It's not actually emycin as you and I would know it, but it's similar. It's a different form of emycin, and it works in a similar way. And so putting a little extra in there I don't think is going to have any ill effect on the fish, and so far I've never had any ill experiences with it. It never hurts my nitrogen cycle or anything. It's good stuff, and it cleans the tank out very well, as you could see. I'm actually kind of surprised that you don't see more kill off of the cyanobacteria on this kind of stuff, but when you look closely you actually can see where the cyanobacteria has been killed off. All that nice dark black color where that liner is, that was green not too long ago, and the green on the front edge of that where you can still see those dark green marks, and I'm not talking about the duckweed on either side, but right along that edge you can see that dark green. That is hair algae. That's not the green cyanobacteria. So it's not until we get down to these kind of areas where we're seeing this dark green slime. This is more cyanobacteria, but that also doesn't have the water directly flowing over it. It's just kind of flowing past it and keeping it moist with being splashed on and stuff like that. And that's why I'm assuming that the chemi-clean had no impact on it. But again, if we look back here, there's no cyanobacteria growing on any of that stuff back there. So again, I really like that chemi-clean. I know some people see it as having some sort of stigma attached to it. If you have to use chemi-clean or something, then you're doing something wrong with your aquarium or whatever. I don't get hung up on that kind of stuff. You know, I get some cyanobacteria in this tank or my other tanks or whatever, and if putting some chemi-clean in there is what cleans it out, then that's fine with me. I don't worry too much about it. And I especially don't worry about any kind of stigma or judgment that goes along with that. And so hopefully this tank will get looking a little bit nicer once I finish getting in there. We are going to shoot some more video about this tank specifically. I want to talk about water circulation, mulm, nitrates, TDS buildup, and all that kind of stuff. I was planning on doing that recently, but I got in there and I did a little bit of maintenance ahead of myself, and now I got to actually kind of let the tank get dirty again before we can talk about it again. So that'll be coming up soon enough. My little foot tank here, nothing really going on in this tank. I did get in there recently and remove a ton of duckweed. The duckweed was almost completely covering the surface, and other than that, that's about all I've done. I haven't really gotten in there and even checked to see who's still in there and what's going on. I'm not even sure if the shrimp are still in there, but year after year goes by, and every time I look in there, I always find shrimp, so I see no reason to think that anything's different now. So that's about all that's going on recently here that I can think of with my waterfall tanks. Let's get these lights turned out. That will cut back on a lot of glare in the rest of the video. And then we will come over here and get started with my 29 miscellaneous. Now, if you're thinking this looks nice and sparkly clean, you are right. It is. I just finished a water change on it, and I did a big water change on it because while I was changing the water, I got in there and pulled the filter intake out and cleaned all the crud out of the inside of that. That's just something that needs to be done once in a while when you have a hang on the back filter. They pop out easy enough. And then I got that all rinsed out in the sink in the other room. I also put new filter pads in it, got those taken care of, and I even did a little bit of minor gravel vacuuming, especially since I got in and knocked all of the crud and a little bit of cyanobacteria and some other stuff that was growing on the leaves there. I sort of scraped and knocked that loose. So once that was swirling around the water column, I wanted to make sure I got that vacked out of there while I was siphoning the tank. And so by the time I was done all of that, including wiping down the glass, we were left with maybe a 50 to 60% water change. It was a significant water change, and you can tell tank looks great. So that's about all that's going on with this tank, though. Just a nice big water change and looking good. My 55-gallon Gourami tank, I haven't done any maintenance on this tank, although it may seem that way. Well, I guess technically if you want to call wiping algae off the glass maintenance, while I was doing the water change on the 29 there, I had my little melamine sponges in my hand, and so I just popped open the lid on this one, and the glass had a lot of growth on it. It was really hard to even see in the tank to see what was going on. So I just took a few minutes while I was draining the water out of my 29, and we went ahead and wiped the glass down in this tank just to be able to see what's going on. Now, the only thing I want to talk about with this tank is the realization I had about a week ago. I've been meaning to mention this in one of my videos, and I keep forgetting, so we're going to do it now since it's on my mind. And that is the idea of me having so many fish that I lose track of which fish I have and where they are. And I'll have people ask me about this fish or that fish, and they'll, oh yeah, I remember that. I did put that fish in that tank or whatever. And this is a perfect case. Nobody's asked me about it, but I remembered the other day I bought that little zebra loach not too long ago. I guess it's been a while now. But it was a tiny little thing, and I was actually worried about getting eaten because it was so small. And it survived for a few months, or at least several weeks. I don't know. I don't remember. I lose track of time, especially nowadays. All just run together for me. Thought it was bad before. At any rate, at some point in the past, I had that in here, and now it's just gone. I haven't seen it in weeks, and I just completely forgot that it was even in here until it struck my mind. Somebody had said something, and it reminded me about that zebra loach. And then the other one is the thick-lipped gourami that I had in this tank. That's gone a long time ago, but I almost forgot that I even had it in this tank. I would really like to see another one of those thick-lipped gouramis in here. That was a really, really cool little gourami. And this is my Gourami tank. For those of you that aren't regulars with my channel, I call it that because when this tank got set up originally way back in the day years ago, it had 7 or 8 gouramis in there, and this was just my Gourami tank, and I've never bothered to change the name of it. That's more of a name than a description, but I do still have 2 gouramis in there, and so which can still be my Gourami tank. We got a honey gourami right here, and then of course we got my big moonlight right there. So moving on to what used to be once upon a time way back in the day called my Angelfish tank, because I had a bunch of angelfish in this tank. I now just call it my 55 because it's changed around so many times in the last several years that we're just calling it my 55 now. This tank definitely needs some attention. The fish are okay, the water's okay, everything's going fine in those regards. It's just starting to look a little ugly because that green cyanobacteria, the bane of my fish tanks, has gotten in there and gotten a hold. It's not overwhelming anything at the moment, but it's in there and it's growing. You can certainly see it around here and there. It started in this corner down here in just one little spot, and it is slowly crept its way over the whole tank, and I mean, you can see all little nooks and crannies. It's all growing back in there and everything, and a chemi-clean treatment will wipe that out and kill it all off, and everything will be fine. And I have no doubt that at some point in the future it will be back in my tank. It just gets in my tanks. It's probably in my basement. I've said this a million times that cyanobacteria is like algae. You know, if it's around, if it's in the atmosphere and the conditions are right for it, it's just going to grow. You know, you can set a glass of water on your windowsill and do nothing to it, and you will get algae growing in it eventually. And if you set a glass of water in your basement, it's not unlikely that you might get cyanobacteria growing in it. You know, I bring in plants from outside, I bring in pieces of wood from outside, and so just the idea that I've got this cyanobacteria in my tanks, I long ago got over worrying about it. I just deal with it as part of what's in my tanks, the same way you deal with algae when you've got it in your tanks. I think about it in the same way I think about it as mowing my lawn. Just because I've cut the grass doesn't mean I'm never going to have to cut my grass again. It'll grow back, and I'll have to deal with it again at some point in the future. So I just haven't gotten around to it in this tank yet. I've actually got kind of plans for this tank. I want to reduce this Anubias. I might scape it a little bit. I might put a few more rocks in there or change around the rocks the way they're in there. I'm just getting kind of tired of looking at this tank the way it is. I don't know, so we'll see. And as a result of that, I've been just kind of putting off really doing anything, and that's why it looks a little unkempt at the moment. It looks a little rough. Fish-wise, ooh, we just got a little glimpse of my Synodontis there until I bursted out and vocally like that and scared him. You can still see him swimming around in there. That is a Synodontis lucipennis. I bought it as a Synodontis petricola, but it is not a petricola. It is definitely a lucipennis. I've had the thing for years and years, and you can see how small it still is, so there's no way that is a petricola. Petricolas get about 5 or 6 inches, and this one is stuck at around 2.5 to 3, which is indicative of the lucipennis. Anyway, fish-wise, what I was going to say is I've got this one diamond Tetra there that's got the swim bladder issue, and it has to more or less swim continually to stay afloat, and that's just in there. It's still doing its thing. That's the way it's been for a long time, and so that one is still with us. Again, my regular viewers will be familiar with that one. And that, of course, is my big pleco lying down there. So moving on to my 40 breeder, this tank is definitely due for some new fish. I'm down to very few fish at this point. I've got one Raspora het. I've got one little glow light Tetra you can see back there hiding in the corner. I've got a few Siamese algae eaters. I've got that one rainbow fish, which at the moment is hiding back there underneath the power head. I don't know how well you can see that. So what I'm thinking about doing with this tank is pulling that rainbow fish out. I know I've talked about this before, but this tank really just has nothing in it now that my Crenocycla regani died. It's just all sort of secondary fish. I don't have any sort of feature fish in this tank. I've got a couple, like I said, schooling fish, but there's no school. It's just one of each. So if nothing else, I would like to add some more Raspora hets or some more glow light Tetras, something like that, to get some color and some motion, a little bit of activity back in the tank. I want to remove that rainbow fish. It's in here all by itself. It's big, it's full grown. I think it would do just fine if I put it over in my 125. And I also have 4 of those Siamese algae eaters, which I know love the hair algae, and my 125 also has a lot of hair algae in it, so I'm thinking about pulling at least 1 or 2 of those Siamese algae eaters out of this tank and moving them over to my 125 and helping them get that cleaned up, which again would sort of open up this tank. I could maybe revamp it a little bit, get in there, make some changes, restock it with some new fish. It's just something to kind of start thinking about. I feel like this tank's time for a little bit of a reset. Again, I might not rescape it or change any of that. There's sentimental value to the way I've got this tank scaped. I've talked about that in other videos, so I'm not going to go into it now. But I do have sentimental value or sentimental attachment to the scape in this tank. Not necessarily to the inhabitants, so we can change it up. Who knows? I had Crebensis in this tank once upon a time. Maybe having a breeding pair of Crebensis in here or something like that might be interesting. I don't know. There's options. We'll see. I'm not in any hurry to get out to a fish store anytime in the near future anyway, so we'll have to wait and see how that plays out. My 125 gallon New World tank is all nice and opened up now. Did a bunch of water changes recently, so I got all that tannin stained water out of there. I removed a bunch of mold and crud and stuff off the bottom. And most importantly, I'm sure most of you have seen, my regular viewers anyway, have certainly seen the video of me pulling this big piece of wood out of there. And for anybody that was asking about that piece of wood or was interested in it, it's already gone. Somebody that lives fairly locally was able to swing by that afternoon and pick it up from a driveway. So that piece of wood is already long gone. They also collected up all the other wood that I had here that I've not been doing anything with. It's just been sitting around taking up space. I had that large piece out in my garden. My wife was actually a little upset when she found out I got rid of that. She really liked the way that looked in the garden. But I put it all out there. They came, they collected it up, and they got themselves a bunch of free driftwood. So good for them. I'm glad somebody's going to use it, because other than having it sit out in my garden, it wasn't doing anything for me. So that's gone. The tank looks a whole lot better. I was kind of thinking about needing to get in there and reduce the stocking density a little bit. I've got a lot of fish in this tank, and some of them are fairly large. But now that I got that piece of wood out of there, it really does seem as though everybody's got plenty of room to swim around. The only two fish I really do want to get out of here are these two creek chubs. I don't have any particular fondness for creek chubs. They're interesting fish, but they're mean, they're aggressive, and they get really big. They're going to be larger than this shiner here, you know, 6 months from now. They grow pretty fast, and it won't be too long before they start eating these little minnows off, and I want to actually keep them in there. I think they make an interesting looking little school of fish. So I'd like to keep those in there. I'd like to get those chubs out of there, and honestly, this minnow here, it's a golden shiner, should probably come out too. This is also a golden shiner. These two are the same species. So I don't know if I want to take them out of there or not. Now that there's more room for this larger one to swim around, I don't feel there's such a need to get it out of there. But you can see the injuries on the side here. That was the result of having so little room to swim around. I think it got stuck and wedged somewhere, and as it wriggled its way out backwards, it probably scaled itself a little bit and tore a bunch of scales off its side. But it's healing up nicely. It looks a whole lot better than it did. That patch was much, much larger than that. This whole area here was just raw skin. There was some blood, you know, it was really tore up. But I've been staying on top of the tank as far as water changes go, and it's been, you know, infection free. We haven't had any issues again, so it's been healing up nicely. I'm just concerned that that fish is a little big. And it's not so much the size and stocking density, it's the type of fish that likes to swim. They're like a schooling swimming fish that needs room. So the angelfish, no matter how big that gets, they don't do anything. They just kind of hover around in the water. They don't swim. The silver dollars are similar. They might dart and dash, but I don't really see them as like long distance open swimming type fish. These are long distance open swimming type fish. These will swim upstream, downstream, along rivers, through lakes. And again, just being cooped up in this tank is probably getting a little cramped for such a large shiner. That is a, you know, let's see if I can get my hand near it without it going away, and we'll get an idea of scale. So, I mean, that gives you an idea of how big that is. That's a good 9-inch long shiner at this point, 8.5 inches. I wouldn't mind catching a fish that big if I went out with my light tackle. So, other than that, not a lot going on in this tank. Again, we got it all nice and cleaned up. Everybody got a good solid look at it. I did pull a bunch of the water sprite out of here. I'm going to do something about sort of repositioning this one and propping it up a little more. Possibly if I leave it alone and just let it sit there, it will just sort of do its own thing and just kind of grow upwards, and that root will stay where it is, and, you know, whatever. So we'll have to wait and see. Let's see if I can get my hand up close to this guy again. I did find it interesting when I did some work in this tank recently, how many people saw the video of it and realized that this tank is a lot bigger than it actually looks when I shoot these videos. This is a 125 gallon tank, and therefore it is 6 feet long. So, you know, that's a significant tank. So again, that shiner is probably a little bigger than you think it is when you see it on these videos. So probably gonna have to get that out of here one of these days soon. Over to this side of the room, let me get my fan turned off here. I always keep a fan blowing in this room just to keep the air circulating. It gets really, really humid and stuffy in here if I don't. This is my snail tank. I've been dumping eggshells in there for about the last week. Every time we have eggs or something, we got some hard-boiled eggs up in the refrigerator. Every time I have one, I just crush the shell up and throw it in here. I don't do anything special to it. I don't wash it. I don't pull the membrane out of it. Nothing. I just crush it up and throw it in there. And that little bit of cloudiness you can see in the water might be a slight ammonia spike, because again, the membranes of the eggshells are proteins, I'm assuming, and that's going to break down and deteriorate. I've been feeding this tank very heavily, trying to build up the snail population, and you can see I'm getting there. Butterbean can really tear through some fish, and so I go through cycles of feeding him snails regularly for about a week, and then the tank gets kind of depleted, and then I sort of have to rely on the shrimp for a while, and then as the population of snails builds back up and grows back in, I can start feeding Butterbean more snails. And so we're probably in that process of getting the population built back up pretty quickly. So not a whole lot going on there, not very interesting, just a snail tank. This tank, however, is my new native tank, and this tank is very interesting. I've been shooting some video of this. I've got some fish on the bottom that are going to be getting some more videos of their own. But in short, I've got some fish in here that I've been calling log perch. I'm not 100% sure what they are, but I believe I've identified at least one of them, not as a log perch, but as a tessellated darter. And I said the other day that I'd put two of them in the tank, but had not seen both of them together at the same time. And unless I see them together, then I don't, you know, I see one now and I see another one 5 minutes from now. I don't know if it's the same fish or not. I got to see them at the same time to know if I'm seeing both fish. And yesterday I saw both fish. I saw them side by side, and they looked significantly different. They had very different markings on their side. So I don't know if I got two different species or what, but I don't think it's a log perch. There's one now. It just sort of plopped down on the rock back there. You can see one. That I think is the one that was not featured in the video I shot the other day. I think that's the different one. So that's really interesting. I want to learn more about them, maybe find out what they are. Ultimately, it's just academic. I don't really need to know what they're called or what specific species they are. I just need to know what they eat and how to keep them alive. And as long as I can do that, I really couldn't care less what they're called. But it would be fun to find out exactly what species they are. This is another one of those situations where, like these fish, the ones with the little black line down the side, I know a lot of people say they're black-nosed dace. But if you actually start looking at the Neotropis species of fish, you will find that there is a lot of fish that look very, very similar to that. In fact, you can see a few of these little fish swimming around. When you really start looking at them close, I do believe I have 2 or 3 different species of these little black striped fish in here. And they're all going to be Neotropis species, I'm sure. But you get into the counting the number of rays on this fin or that fin, or how many scales it has behind its eye, or whether the stripe continues all the way through the tail. It's all these fine-tuned little things. A lot of stuff you might even need a microscope or a magnifying glass to see the anatomical details to really positively identify which species these fish are. So I'm not too concerned about it, but it would be interesting to find out what species these little darters are. I do think they're darters. I don't think they're actually log perch. Someone suggested that to me, and when I looked up log perch, again, I said, hey, that's close enough for me. That sure looks like a log perch. And now that I've been doing a little more research, I've had a few viewers give me some pointers and suggest different fish that it might be. I definitely don't think it is a log perch. I definitely think it is a darter of some sort. Both of them, I think, are darters of some sort. Let's see, this little guy right here is definitely a unique fish. It doesn't really swim around with a school of other ones, and it has that interesting behavior of nibbling off of the rocks and the algae and stuff, more so than any of the other black striped fish. It also is smaller, which I just assumed meant it was younger originally. I don't know if that's the case anymore, because it sort of looks a little different. It's got a pointier front end on it. So I definitely think I have multiple species of Neotropis in this tank at this point. I know I've got mosquito fish in here. That's the Gambusia. There's no question about that. In fact, I've lost a few more. I actually found 2 dried up ones on the floor this morning. So we're down at least 2 more Gambusia from what we were. So lots of good stuff coming up in this tank as we investigate those fish a little more. So moving on to my 125-gallon tank. Did not get this tank cleaned up prior to the video. You can see all that green on the glass. That is the hair algae. You can see the big column of bubbles there. I've got 2 of them going on. I went out and got a air pump for a 100-gallon tank, so it really moves a volume of air. And you can see how lush and green all of that hair algae is. I've said before, it's beautiful stuff, but it's growing like crazy in this tank. I've killed off all of the cyanobacteria that was in here. I've killed off, you can see how brown and just dead looking all that stuff is, all of the biofilm and all the growth that's all over the rocks and everything there. That's all been killed. My plants all look nice and green. All I've really got going on to make it unsightly at this point is the green hair algae. All the rest of the tank looks great. And of course we get down here to where we've got more bright light and you've got algae growing all over the glass and everything again. So other than that, not a lot going on in my 125 here. I did do a back-to-back chemi-clean treatment on it. I've done 2 of them, and I'm really kind of done. It's been several days since the last treatment. I don't think I'm going to do a third treatment on it. This is the tank I was talking about earlier, putting that other rainbow fish in. You can see I've got several rainbow fish in here, a couple different species to begin with. These are Marcy rainbow fish, and then these yellow and orange ones are albino millenniums, these being the males and the bright orange ones being the female. And I had more, but I've lost a few over the years, so throwing another Australian rainbow fish in there certainly isn't going to hurt. Adding to that school a little bit. This tank's not overstocked at all. I could definitely throw another fish in there without much issue. So again, not a lot going on here. Just need to do a little bit of tidying up, and once we've done that, we'll be good to go. My 20-gallon angelfish tank, I've done a little bit of rearranging to this one. I did have the filter on this side where it's more open, and what I found was I was getting a lot of cyanobacteria in this tank all the time. I was really having issues in this tank, and I think it had to do with the poor water circulation. When you have a low flow of water, you will have more, it's just more amenable to have the cyanobacteria grow when you don't have a lot of good vigorous circulation. And so what was going on was I think the water was flowing in and just doing this on this end, and this end was getting very little water flow because of all of the Java fern and everything. I've got rocks and pieces of woodwork in there, and so I did a big chemi-clean treatment on this tank too. I got it all cleaned up. I know it looks like it's all filthy, but that's actually, again, just algae growing on the glass. You can see all of the little, you know, chew marks and teeth marks and everything. That's from my little clown pleco. He's actually sitting halfway out right now. We can see him a little bit. So that little clown pleco down there does a pretty good job of keeping this tank clean. You can see how clean that wood is up to a certain point, and then it just, you know, gets covered in algae again as it goes further up in the tank. But you can see it does a pretty good job. The leaves on the plants are fairly clean. And again, the cyanobacteria is different than algae. You know, just having the green in the tank doesn't mean it's bad. It just means I got algae in the tank. The cyanobacteria is gone at this point. But I think having the tank opened up a little more, I moved the piece of wood from right through the middle of the tank. I put the piece of wood down at this end of the tank, and then I moved the filter, which it admittedly does need to be changed out at this point. You can see it's backflowing. It gets a little too much, and then it actually has a safety so it doesn't spill onto the floor. It just backflows back into the tank. And so I need to get in there and change out that filter, but I still think ultimately having the filter at this end, moving the water, sort of forces it to move into the more open end of the tank and gives me a little bit better circulation. And I seem to have less issues since I've set it up this way. I haven't really had that cyanobacteria come back in any kind of significant way, and it's been a few weeks now, so I'm happy about that. Otherwise, not a lot going on with that. That is my quarantine tank. It's still sitting down there. It's been down there so long, you can see how low the water, and I've actually topped it off a couple times and it's still sitting there that low, but that's just sitting there running in case I ever go buy fish again. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. And lastly, we get to my Brackish Tank. At least that's what it's called, even though the water technically is no longer actually brackish. Not a lot going on in this tank to talk about either. I did a water change not too long ago. This is one of those tanks that I just seldom get around to doing water changes. It goes weeks and weeks and weeks, sometimes months between water changes. I genuinely, honestly do not remember the last time I did anything with the filter. Sun canister filter. I think that's the 303B. I think that's the small canister filter on this tank because it's only a 40-gallon tank. But as long as I'm getting decent water flow and water circulation, which you can see I am, I just never worry about it. You can see all the little guppies swimming around in there. I put a bunch of little, I think these are actually hybrid guppy Endler babies. I'm not sure, but they're all yellow except for one over here. Looks like it's a different color. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Maybe it's just when they swim in and under the light. I'll have to wait till they grow up a little bit. Butterbean's just in there doing his thing. Not a lot to talk about with this tank. Again, did a water change. I got the glass wiped down. I vacuumed out a bunch of the red cyanobacteria that grows in this tank. And that's about it. Not a lot to talk about. So I will say, as I started to mention, that this tank is called my Brackish Tank, and for years it truly was brackish water in this tank. But a while ago, Butterbean was having weird, almost lesions on his skin. He was weird white marks and stuff. And so I reduced the salinity in the tank, and the more I reduced the salinity, the better he seemed to look. And eventually I got the salinity down to where it is now, which is at about 1.00 or 1.002, something like that. It's just below what the bottom end of what you would call brackish water. So it's still got marine salts in it. It just doesn't have as much marine salts as you would put in it to make it actually brackish. And if you look, you can see pretty much all those lesions are gone. He doesn't have any of those white marks on him anymore. The lightly colored spots, sort of on the back of his head, I guess you could call it, those are his yellow markings. Those aren't those weird white lesions at all. And he really seems to have recovered completely. So despite being told for years and telling other people for years to keep your figure 8 puffer in brackish water, I really don't think they need brackish water. I would say hard water maybe, or put some marine salts in the water to get it close to being brackish water. But keeping them in brackish water, I kept it at 1.008 for years and years, and those lesions just got worse and worse on him the whole time I did that. So again, it was when I reduced the salinity in the tank and brought it back to just below being brackish that he recovered, and now he looks fine. So there you go. That is the last look at my brackish tank. We've made it all the way around the world back to where we started, more or less. I know we technically started at the Waterfall Tank, but you get the idea. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed that. Make sure you're subscribed. You never know what you're going to get from me. I got lots of stuff on my mind. I don't know whether I'm going to ever get to it or not, but we'll try. And if you're subscribed, of course, you won't miss any of that or anything else. So thanks again for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you real soon on the next one.